later, I have a piece which is headed, "A Trump victory is critical. The alternative will mean irreversible damage to the West." And that is the situation. Donald Trump's election as the 47th president is crucial, and not only to the United States of America. The alternative, whether this be Kamala Harris or some suggest Michelle Obama or indeed anybody else, will produce exactly the same disaster. It will produce 4 more years of appeasement of the Beijing-Moscow-Tehran axis, uncontrolled immigration to the United States, including terrorists and criminals and those released from mental institutions, and the prevalence of climate catastrophism and other alien ideologies. They'll all risk such damage to the United States and Western civilization that after 4 more years, it could well be irreversible. If anybody can return America to the power, respect, and authority she once enjoyed, it is surely Donald Trump. As the 45th president, he had already demonstrated his remarkable ability. As the 47th, he will no doubt relieve America from the ideologies that the long march through her institutions has imposed on that nation. He will close the borders to the uncontrolled massive migration that Biden imposed in breach of the migration law of the United States. Internationally, in NATO and other alliances, he will require the freeloaders, those freeloading on the United States, to become true allies and make a real contribution. And he'll return the Beijing-Moscow-Tehran axis to the good behavior they prudently demonstrated during his first term. He'll restore peace in the Middle East, as he did with the Abraham Accords. And he has ensured that his ideas will continue with his choice of J.D. Vance as the candidate vice president. And whatever he does at home will be a lesson for all of us, for all the free world to follow. When it comes to the presidential election, we've got to ignore the commentariat that scorned Donald Trump, just as they scorned Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and at home, John Howard and Tony Abbott. Remembering that providence has long been fundamental to the American project, you find it in the Declaration of Independence, for example, we should ignore the elites who ridicule those who see divine intervention in Donald Trump's narrow escape from death. We should especially ignore those who repetitively describe the interpretation of crucial events as blatant lies, including the widely held belief that the 2020 election was stolen. Now, the Supreme Court case on that, brought by Texas, supported by 18 states and 100 members of the House of Representatives, details the flouting of the Constitution's express words to steal that election. Now, the judges of the Supreme Court, already threatened by Senate Democrat Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, refrained from ruling on this because of a technicality. So why should anybody outside of the United States, including Australians, perhaps especially Australians, be concerned by the American election? The American election is particularly relevant to Australia. Australia has long been intimately linked with America's destiny. And the American influence in Australia was such that many more key aspects of American constitutionalism can be found in ours than in, for example, the Canadian Constitution or that of any other former British dominion. Indeed, many Australians in the 19th and early 20th centuries saw their country's future in terms of development and wealth and power as following and perhaps even rivaling America's. To them, Australia was to be the America of the Pacific. But as the great broadcaster, AlanJones, my colleague, has long argued, such a golden future for Australia will never be achievable without moving water from where it falls to where it's needed. Instead, the prevailing establishment belief is that while new dams are undesirable, a policy introduced by the Hawke government in 1983, it is not only acceptable but desirable to destroy the environment to enrich Beijing with what will be very soon useless junk, solar and wind farms. Instead, they support the insanity of cramming massive immigration into just 3 overcrowded conurbations, Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, on the world's most sparsely developed continent. Without a watered Australia making us like America, we at least remain closely aligned to her. This is in our nature. Apart from a strong American influence in Australia, including in the drafting of our Constitution, why is the election this year so important to Australians? Australia had the good fortune to be settled by the British, whose empire, despite its faults, did far more good than any other. It should never be forgotten that in ending the slave trade, first time it was ended, the British employed for over 60 years and at great human and monetary cost the world's then greatest force, the Royal Navy, in policing the Atlantic and outlawing the Atlantic slave trade. And as to Australia, under the British, self-government was granted within a surprisingly short period of time, with the British being the earliest proponents of federation. This experience of tutelage under the then greatest power on earth confirmed in Australians, which is unusual for a former colony, the vocation of being a nation as a good international citizen. And as such, Australia has been involved, to a remarkable degree, in helping to defend the freedom of others. We were among the very few countries that played a significant role from the beginning to the end of the Second World War, where, as a proportion of the population, almost twice as many Australians gave their lives as Americans. In the First World War, the proportion was 10 times that of Americans. This isn't to denigrate the great contribution of the United States in both wars, but to compare ours with another power outside of the central areas of conflict. In our short history as a nation, with international interests, the world has very much changed. Britain was the dominant power from the settlement in 1788 until during the First World War. And then, because of American increasing isolationism, British leadership continued until 1941, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and this brought America into the Second World War. She was neutral until then. As good international citizens, as part of the free world, and especially in relation to Australia's defence, Australians should be vitally concerned with the election of any American president. The international leadership of a US president, because of the nature of the office and its curious monarchical form within the Republic, means that the leadership of an American president is normally more secure and more obvious than that of a prime minister during the British period. Their leadership was shared between a king, later a king emperor or queen empress, increasingly above politics, with the Westminster Prime Minister in a form of cabinet government responsible to the House of Commons and immediately dismissible by the House of Commons. That didn't mean that the King Emperor never had a role. Take, for example, the role of King Edward VII and the Entente Cordiale between Britain and France before the First World War, but an entente which was between two nations, Britain and France, who had been close to war during the 1898 Verschuurde crisis. The Westminster system meant that a strong British Prime Minister, even Winston Churchill, was less likely to have the same status and role in the world as a strong American president. Today, few will disagree with the proposition that this year's election in the United States is extremely important. As Donald Trump says, it's probably the most important. America is at the crossroads. Only Trump offers salvation. His election is crucial to America and to the free world, including Australia. The weekend